that you're not biting off a huge investment in this beginning. Right, that way you can say, okay, we're slowly working our way up, and we're working with a valid blueprint that considers a number of factors given from the data that we have.
Yeah, and this is also confirming the trends that we keep hearing of higher quality means more expensive, international means cheaper. So I did feel that the portfolio confirmed a lot of those trends that we heard.
So as a group, you all recommend the option 6?
Yes.
It's our preferred option just because it's balanced on the metric of
Yes.
quality that we derived and the cost effectiveness and diversity.
In conjunction with the other things that we talked about, the last two slides kind of gave you a balance to look at what we thought.
But ultimately, we found that to be the balanced approach that we thought would be recommendable for well.
So let me wrap my head around a couple things.
Okay.
I didn't get the staging of the purchase. You're saying 25% of the 2030 need is purchased in 2024.
So it kind of go a couple different ways. One of the ideas along those lines is not necessarily set in stone with the actual purchase practice, but it would be something along the lines of you aim to mitigate 25% of your emissions, let's say in 2024. Right, so come 2024, that year we're looking to mitigate, we're looking to buy RECs and offsets that will cover 25% of those emissions difference from what we already do, because we also don't know what technology will increase. So as we do that phased approach where we actually break it down and say, okay, in 2024 we have this much emissions left over to cover for, we're gonna go and buy 25% of the RECs and offsets necessary using this blueprint that we came up with. And then we retire them for that. But in doing so, we leave time for continued efforts in other parts of UVA to come in and possibly decrease that number. So rather than buying too much all at once and then not needing as much as we may purchase, we can then ramp up and then get a better idea of the scope of our capabilities, 8 years down the line.
So are we retiring anything in 2024?
Yeah, so it would be, well,
No, it'd be
so
2030.
you kind of, what were you saying, Dennis?
No, we start retiring in 2030 to meet the carbon neutrality goal of 2030.
Okay.
Right.
So 600,000 is today's dollars in 2030, but not a reoccurring cost that we're going to see phased in from 24 to
Well,
From when?
30.
the rolling approach, we should also take into account the future costs, so no,
Sorry, that's the number.
that
I'm looking
1.1
for.
million.
So then I guess my question becomes, maybe it's for Paul. Do you purchase and then hold and then ask the schools to pay for them in 2030?
Well, what I have proposed is that thermal utilities will be, I would pay for those, and the school would pay for the emissions beyond.
Right.
So this really didn't break that apart.
Okay.
This is the chilled water.
Okay.
So that's, I have to think about it.
Okay. Because yeah, that's the interesting part of the purchase and hold, is the school sees the benefit upon retirement, but we would make the purchase early.
Well, it's not we, it's they. But the fraction of their procurement would be much smaller.
Right.
Because I'm proposing that I make the thermal utilities
Right.
carbon neutral.
Okay.
There's also a lot of risk in retiring because it's such a speculative market.
I mean, you're talking me into just buying all the offsets available in the world and then hanging on to them indefinitely. And we're using them to retire our carbon problem.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Bill.
That was
There's a-
one thing that Paul and I talked about earlier when we first
Oh, sorry,
started
back-
talking
back
about
slide.
this.
So there's a risk with that. There's one backup slide that we have in there, if you could go, that one right there. So before 2016, a lot of the credits that were purchased are not going to be able to be redeemed. So the other reason for the short time horizon for 2030 is that we're fairly confident those will be able to be redeemed or retired in 2030. As you start going further out, your additionality becomes a risk, and that's something you have to take into account. So technology is going to change, renewable energy is going to build. So building up too much of a whole portfolio is probably not the way to go.
Okay.
I would love to keep this
I know.
conversation still going a little bit, but I just. Good job. Ambridge, you are up.
They do 20 minutes, do 20 minutes, and then you're gonna have 10 minutes for Q&A. I'm gonna do a better job with Q&A, maybe. I'll give you a 5-minute, and
I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that
yeah, no
guy.
question, you're fine.
I've done so much research in such little time, even like random projects, I've never read so much into these topics.
It's the worst.
Well, I'm saying I didn't want to, like, call out across, I just saw that you were, I was trying to engage in the conversation. I also know that you talked a lot about that.